I'm glad you brought up that idea that sometimes some people I think are playing fast and loose with this term, and we've weaponized language today. I've spoken with this about with other linguists as well about how it just seems to me like I don't know if we've ever weaponized it to this level with just one word we can throw it at someone and completely tear them down and completely remove their humanity. It's pretty horrific. And you mentioned the interviews, and I want to bring one up that I think will kind of make a point here. And the speaker is identified as Stephen in the article, and he talks about being mocked for being a virgin. But then he includes the following. I'm going to quote it. I've heard people say that incels aren't really looking for companionship, that they're looking for social capital, or that they want to be seen as a certain way or a certain view of masculinity. That they could brag and be the person who gets a girlfriend. While that may be the motivation for some, I think it's weird that some people can't believe that some just want to do it because they're lonely. They have to make it into something more sinister. Now, you tell me if I'm reading too much into it. Stephen, to me, provides an important distinction for us here, I think. I would want to reach out to this young man and tell him that there's a shared history of mockery, for one thing, right, within this male community, and that you don't necessarily need to identify with the incel community to find a group of people who will stand with you, who believe that this form of mockery is just plain stupid and pernicious. And I bring this up because my worry is that if we make this something that we routinely do to these young men and kind of mock them continually and then start calling them incel to separate them out, it's not a big leap for me to believe that they might just go over to that side because that will provide them that kind of community that they can, kind of hide with. Am I wrong in that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we all tend to flock to groups that have shared experiences. We all tend to be friends or, close acquaintances, at least with people who have gone through similar things as us. And it goes back to these long-term discussions we've had about bullying. Is there some people that think that bullying is a natural practice of growing up? They say, well, if you don't experience bullying in school, you'll never make it in the workforce because there's bullies in the workforce. And that's true to an extent, but we're also through incels, I think, seeing sort of the negative impact of all that. It's like we were talking about earlier. There's just so much information coming at you from every which way that it's almost like these young men are still experiencing like the grade school bullying, the things where it would be totally normalized to call a friend of yours like a homophobic slur or something like that. Or, if a friend loses their virginity before you, that's this big deal when you're in high school. But in the real world, people tend to fizzle out of that. They tend to stop caring as much. But when you're in these online spaces where I'm sure it started with a few people who had shared experiences with this, started talking online, and then that picked up and we started talking about this on the internet. Social media brought a lot of that like grade school bullying into the online space that you can't really escape it anymore. And I think all of us have probably gotten far too wrapped up in something online. We've all had that one comment on a video or a social media post or whatever that we did that we just engaged with it for way too long. We got mad, we got upset when we could have just like closed the app or turned our phone off or computer off. But for this group, it's being stuck in that space. And we do talk about how these spaces can kind of be an echo chamber for that too. Of when you have a group of people that have these shared experiences and they're constantly talking about like, oh, well, I just posted this and someone responded this, here, screenshot, share it on my post on here. It just snowballs and it builds and builds and builds. And it makes it tough because it's like, what do you do to get people out of those spaces?
I think those comments from Stephen and from Mark too really showcase the emotion behind it. That it's not just that they're mad because they're not having sex, which I think is the reductionist explanation of what an incel is. That far too many people are hung up on this notion of incels feel that they're entitled to sex. There is a certain element to entitlement if you're on the forums, but from the interviews that I found, and this may be because they were talking to a woman, right? But from the men that I spoke to, it was about companionship. It was about touch and hugs and having just connections with other people. And in the absence of them, they've found this community. So many of the people that I've interviewed, in addition to ones after this article was submitted, speak to kind of what you said about somebody called them an incel. And then they said, I don't know what that means. And then they found this community. Other people were mocked or recognized that they had a problem with not finding relationships or having sex. So they tried to figure out what the problem is, what's wrong with me. And then that kind of led them to the path. And then they found not only a community that supports them and understands them, but then creates kind of this common enemy in Chad or Stacy or red pill, blue pill mess, and then gives them kind of reward points in a sense for also having been victimized, right? So I think that we're underestimating the purpose of these forums and what the users get from them, instead of just an opportunity for them to say vile things. There's a lot more to these communities than people want to admit.